now we've come to the penultimate scene and sequence of events in the story of Esther. Even though it's only been 24 hours since the last banquet, a lot has happened, especially for Haman. Last night, Haman went home happy and with a bit of a big head, but now he's been humiliated and has at least in part accepted the fact that he can't kill Mordecai the way he had hoped to. And so while it was still an honor and privilege for Haman to attend another private party with the king and queen, in reality, he was likely a little disillusioned and perhaps somewhat prepared for what was about to happen. Esther chapter 7, verses 1 to 7. So the king and Haman went to Queen Esther's banquet, and as they were drinking wine on the second day, the king again asked, "Queen Esther, what is your petition? It will be given you. What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom it will be granted." Then Queen Esther answered, "If I have found favor with you, your majesty, and if it pleases you, grant me my life, this is my petition, and spare my people, this is my request. For I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. If we had merely been sold as male and female slaves, I would have kept quiet, because no such distress would justify disturbing the king." King Xerxes asked Queen Esther, "Who is he? Where is he, the man who has dared to do such a thing?" Esther said, "An adversary and enemy, this vile Haman." Then Haman was terrified before the king and queen. The king got up in a rage, left his wine, and went out into the palace garden. But Haman, realizing that the king had already decided his fate, stayed behind to beg Queen Esther for his life. So this is it. Haman has finally met his match. Our evil and vengeful antagonist, a man filled with hatred for the Jews, has now been replaced with a distraught and desperate scoundrel, a man begging Hadassah the Jew for his life. Now, over the course of the last few chapters, we have seen Haman's demise slowly unfolding, from Esther's plan of fasting and discernment to the divine irony of his humiliation in front of Mordecai. But when we come to the end of chapter 7, maybe the thing we were least expecting, and what might be the biggest surprise, is the sudden change of character in the king, who in a moment of rage appears to have grown a bit of a backbone. Or as one biblical scholar summarizes it, the king is appropriately enraged. We have seen him angry for lesser causes, but he does not express his anger verbally. Indeed, the implication is that he is so angry that he cannot contain himself, and so he leaves the room. But there is no verbal reaction from King Xerxes. Instead, there are gestures, as if a pantomime is being enacted. Haman cringes, Xerxes rises. Haman stands, the king returns, and Haman falls. Xerxes looks a bit more kingly by the end of this chapter. He is still a comic figure and is still led by the suggestions of his inferiors, but his emotions and decisions are at last fitting for the occasion, even if he came to them slowly and not altogether for the right reasons. You see, even though the story of Esther has been a work of theatricality and a comedy of errors, there are still redemptive moments, or at least glimpses of something greater going on behind the scenes. Even though the name of God is absent from this story, the sequence of events and implications suggest that the author and spirit of this story is drawing us or calling us towards a redemptive conclusion. And yet, we're still confronted by the violent end of our enemy at the conclusion of this historical account. Verses 8 to 10. Just as the king returned from the palace garden to the banqueting hall, Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was reclining. The king exclaimed, "Will he even molest the queen while she is with me in the house?" As soon as the word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Then Harbona, one of the eunuchs attending the king, said, "A pole reaching to a height of 50 cubits stands by Haman's house. He had it set up for Mordecai, who spoke up to help the king." The king said, "Impale him on it." So they impaled Haman on the pole he had set up for Mordecai. Then the king's fury subsided. This is how our antagonist is eliminated, impaled upon his own pole. Like something out of a horror movie or a Quentin Tarantino film, we're left wondering, how should we feel about this? I mean, is this what we had hoped for? Is this the type of story that satisfies us, when vengeance is acted upon those who seek revenge? And the truth is, there are no easy answers. Our feelings and questions at the end of chapter 7 are left to linger, because we must continue on towards our conclusion. Because even though our enemy has been eliminated, his evil scheme is still in motion, and his act of genocide has not yet been stopped.
Next time on Esther in Isolation.
Esther and Mordecai have now been given the authority to rewrite history, or to at least provide a historical course correction to save the children of Israel. But as soon as we say such words or think such thoughts, we read on and are left to wonder, by whose hand or imagination will deliverance come?